your seats. Membership is those resident students on a full-time equivalency basis. And I'll talk through that more as we get rolling. We'll go through the revenue side of our budget, the expenditure side of our budget, the fund balance. That's always a question from the community. What does that mean, fund balance? Is that just savings sitting there waiting to be used on a project? So I'll talk through some of that. And then we'll get into the tax levy and mill rate that we're anticipating and next steps in the budget process. So tonight is your meeting. This is a meeting of the electorate. The annual meeting is not the school board's meeting. It's the meeting of the community to take a look at the budget and then give an approval or make a motion to change the budget or whatever the community is interested in doing with the budget. It is it's a recommendation type vote because the school board in October is then required to set the levy and adopt a final budget for the school year coming up. So Wisconsin's school funding formula, and I'm going to keep it pretty basic here. It all starts with the revenue limit. Revenue limits were put into place in 1993. They were intended to be a 2-year fix to property taxes. Property taxes were going through the roof back in the early 90s, late 80s. And so the state legislature put in part of the three-legged stool. And one of those three-legged stools, or 3 legs, was the revenue limit. And the revenue limit is basically the amount of dollars that a district gets to operate with in a school year. And it's limited by a formula. So we can think of the revenue limit, and I'm going to go through this later too, but think of it as the size of the pie. And not all school districts have the same size pie because your revenue limit is based on what you spent in 1992-93 school year. So if you were a high spender back then you have more taxing authority today than those that were low spenders back then. And Arrowhead was a conservative district back then and still is. And so we are a very low spending district due to the conservative nature back in 1992. And we've been below our neighbors because we were low spenders and they were high spenders. And you'll see that in the slides here. So the revenue limit controls how much we get to operate with. The next piece of the formula is state aid. So of the revenue limit, how much is the state going to contribute toward your operating budget? That's what state aid is. When they increase state aid, that doesn't mean we get more to operate with, because what we operate with is the revenue limit. So when they increase state aid, that impacts the tax levy. So if you take the revenue limit, subtract what the state's going to pay, that leaves the amount that the local taxpayer is going to pay. That's the basic formula. Pretty simple. So what makes up the revenue limit calculation? You take your membership, which is not enrollment. Membership is similar to enrollment. It's the number of kids that are sitting in your seats, plus all of those kids that are Arrowhead residents and attend another school district through open enrollment. So maybe they're going to Oconomowoc or Kettle Moraine or another neighboring district. We have about 75-ish students that live in the district but attend other schools through open enrollment. So we get to add those back into our head count. So all the kids that are sitting in our seats plus those kids. But now we got to subtract out all of the kids that are sitting in our seats that live in other districts and open enroll in. So we have 280 students that open enroll in. That reduces our enrollment down to a membership number that we build our revenue limit off of. So those open enrollment kids don't help us on revenue limit, but they do bring in revenue with them. It's outside of the revenue limit though. We want residents to be able to build operating money to operate the district with. So membership, which is head count plus the residents that are attending other districts, minus the kids that are in our seats that live in other districts. That is our membership number. We multiply that by a maximum revenue per member. Remember what that was built on? It was built on 1993. How are you spending at 93 per student? That's what ours is built on. And that gives you your revenue limit, the size of the pie from the previous slide. And the state's gonna share what portion? If they're gonna share 10%, then the local taxpayer is gonna pay 90% of the bill. Basic formula. 83% of our revenues are controlled by that formula. We don't have a lot of control over the rest of it. 17% is made up of fees, interest income, some of those smaller revenues. So not a lot of revenue that we control. This is all controlled by the state formula. Enrollment, really important because it drives membership. So here's what our enrollment has been doing. It's in a chart format. I'm going to bring it up in a graph here next. But back in 2013-14, we had 2,248 students, almost 2,250 students sitting in our seats. Last year, we had 2,076. Next year, we anticipate 2,042. And in the future, we can see that number continuing to go down. Thankfully, this is the first year where I'm seeing a level out. Now, the predictions are not as good as we get further out, but they're pretty good in those first couple of years. Here's that look in a graphic format. It looks like my slide's getting cut off a little bit here, but you can see those same numbers in the decline that we've been in. So what do you think that does to our operating revenue? We're decreasing operating revenue when our head count goes down. So this is head count. And last year we predicted our head count would be 2,042 also. And it came in at 2,076. And I thought, how was I so far off last year? And it was because we had a lot more open enrollment than we were expecting. Did they help us on revenue limit? No. But they did help bring in additional operating revenue, but just not through the revenue limit formula. Here's a look at back in 13-14, all the way out to 20-30-31. And as I said, so it's just taking that chart, the future numbers, and putting it into a line graph. So it does start to, there's some hope out there in 30-31 that we're gonna maybe level off around 1,900 kids and maybe go up a little bit from there. This changes a little bit each year, and it's based on attrition rates. I get the numbers from the elementary schools, put them into a spreadsheet and formula, and predict out what the future might look like for our number of kids sitting in our seats at Arrowhead. That was enrollment. This is membership. So in 2017, I'm just going to go back. 2017-18, 2,169 students turns into 2,104 residents on a full-time equivalency. This is the number that we build our operating budget off of. I wish it was the 2,169, but it's not. So this is what our revenue limit has been doing, the membership count. And if we're multiplying by $10,000 each year, you can see that that's just less and less to operate with each year. And that's why you may be starting to hear out in the community, we need operating money. We need money to fix the facilities. There may be referendum talk coming up. This is most of the reason. We have enough to instruct our, teach our kids, but we're falling behind in our facility infrastructure. And thankfully, we passed one in 2020. We passed a referendum, and that passed by 60 votes on 22,000 voters. And all we were asking is, hey, we have a $1.7 million debt payment that's coming off the books. Can we replace that with $1.7 million to take care of some of the infrastructure needs? And the voters said yes by 60 on 22,000. So it's tough to get a referendum passed, and that's the only tool we have to avoid being restricted to the revenue limits. Here's the revenue limit calculation again, membership times maximum revenue per member. So resident student count times the maximum allowable per student equals the revenue limit. And there's our amount per student we've gotten since 16-17, $10,014 in 2016-17, and $10,900 in the upcoming year. Now, this was before the state budget was passed when we put this preliminary budget together. That number is actually going to be 11,000 this year. So what happened was the legislators agreed, or the budget that was approved on July 5th and signed into law gave a $325 per student per member increase. That wouldn't bring us up to 11,000 from 10,550. We also had, now I'm getting complicated here, but we also had a little transfer of service, and that's why the number's more than $325 above that. But they also set the revenue limit floor at $11,000. So if you were below 11,000, they're bringing you up. So all of those low spending districts back in 1993, they gave us a little help. And we're gonna get $53 more per student than we would have if they didn't do that. And it used to be at $10,000 was the minimum that you had to have. It used to be, meaning the last state budget. Oh, is my clicker not working? Oh, I just snooze my. Sorry about that. Okay. I don't know how well you can see this, but these are the per student, per member increases that were put into place in state law with the revenue limit. When revenue limits were put into place in 1993, they were intended to move with inflation. They were intended to be a 2-year deal. And then they said 5-year at the very maximum. It's only been 30 years now, right? We're still under revenue limits. And they used to adjust to inflation. So those are all inflationary increases all the way until 2010, 9-10, when we got $200. There wasn't enough money at the state level to fund the state aid that would have been required to offset property tax levies if the revenue limit would have been allowed to lift up with CPI. So that was the first year that it didn't pace with inflation. And you can see what it's done ever since that time. We're getting measly increases of $50 and $75, and then we took away $528. Well, what came with that takeaway was Act 10. So you hear a lot about Act 10. What happened? Well, they took away our revenue limit money. $500 was 5.5% per district. And with that, you were given tools to help offset your expenses. So the staff had to start paying half of the Wisconsin retirement system. The districts were allowed to change health insurance benefits without negotiating them through the union. Some of those tools. So Arrowhead has used all of those tools. And but you can still see we were not given inflationary increases. $50 and $75, and then 4 years of zeros doesn't help us in operating. So this past budget is one of the best state budgets we've ever had, but it doesn't make up for the $3,000 that we're behind because of not keeping up with inflation. So here's how we compare to our neighbors. Sorry, this is getting cut off at the top here, but Elmbrook was a high spender back in 1992-93. Mukwonago was a very low spender back in 92-93. Arrowhead was right down there too. So you can see we're at 10,550. This is last year's numbers. If we were working up the same number of students, but Elmbrook's number, we would have $2.9 million more to work with, more to operate with every year. Every year, almost $3 million more. So over 5 years, it's almost $15 million. We might be able to avoid referendums if we had that kind of operating money to work with. But we were conservative in 92-93, and we're paying for it today. Yeah. With low revenues. That's on my clicker. This is a look at, so that was Waukesha County, the previous slide. This is a look at Union high schools. There's 10 of them in the state. We're one of the 10. And you can see this is maximum revenue per student. So where we were spending in 1992-93, plus the inflationary increases until those stopped in 2008-9. Then we, everyone got the same increases. But if you started higher, you ended higher, right? So we're at 10,550. Nicolet's at 15,811 per student. Our tax rate is at 210. And Nicolet's is at 520. The Union High School average is 317. So we're very low taxes here. And very low, even when you put in our K-8 average, we're at 578 compared to a typical K-12 in the state of Wisconsin at 768. And that's the tax rate. I'll talk more about tax rate later and what that all means. So this is what I talked about earlier. It's the revenue limit is the size of the pie, the diameter of the pie. And the state aid is the filling. How much of the filling is made up of state aid and how much of the filling is made up of local property tax. So let's take a look. Here's a typical, a wealthy district. We're considered wealthy here at Arrowhead. And it's not based on the wealth of the people, maybe somewhat indirectly it is, but it's the property value of this district divided by the number of members. So that membership number, not enrollment, membership. So if you divide the property value by membership, you'll get a property value per student. And so we have high property value per student. What happens if our property value goes up? And at the same time, our student count goes down. The property value per student just went up. Makes us look even richer in the formula when our student count goes down. What if property value of the district stayed the same and the student count went down? We still look richer in the formula. Okay, so there's a property wealthy district similar to what we are. We're about 80-20, 80% local property tax, 20% state aided. A little less than 20%. I'm just using round numbers here. And then a property poor district, they might be 90% funded through state aid and 10% by the local property tax. A lot of times those are rural districts with lots of agricultural land. It's not districts with lots of recreational lake property. Those would fall more like Arrowhead does. So again, this is state aid and kind of showing how that can be distributed, but it's really our operating money is built off of revenue limit. State aid is just a portion the state's going to pay of that. We don't get any more operating money when the state says we're giving you more state aid. It's no more operating, it's just less taxes, which is good. Here's the quick formula again. Revenue limit, we've got 23.2 million in revenue limit authority. The rest of our budget is those other minor revenues. Take the state aids out of it and you get the tax levy. We're looking at about a 17, almost an $18 million tax levy for the upcoming year, based on the numbers we know today. That'll all change when we get our final numbers in September and October. Here's what our state aid has looked like, our actual numbers. Can't see the years there, but it starts with 2000. I can't see them either. 21, 22, and then 22, 23, left to right. 23, 24, what we're projecting for next year, 5 million. And then our projection in the future years. And what happens when state aid goes down? Property tax goes up. Because and property tax doesn't go up as much as the state aid goes down. In fact, this year that's not happening. Our state aid is going to go down this year, we're anticipating. But because our revenue limit went down too, that difference didn't go onto the property tax. Property tax didn't go up as much as it could have if our revenue limit actually paced with inflation. Here's our revenue limit history. So you can see on the left in 2017-18, we were at about 22 million and we're at about 23 million. Look at the bump from 1920 to 2021. Anyone know what happened in 1920 to 2021 year? We passed that referendum by 60 votes. We got an additional $1.7 million to work with. Oh yeah, by the way, we didn't have the debt payment so we weren't taxing for that debt payment that year. Instead, we just put it on here. So it looks like we got a big lift in revenue. We didn't really get any more money, but we got more operating money. We just didn't have debt to pay off. So that's what happened in 2021. But you can see the revenue limit hasn't changed much at all. We've been operating on about the same operating budget year after year after year. As student count goes down, this revenue limit authority goes down, and we operate on the same dollars, which is tough because And we all know health insurance doesn't stay the same and utility cost doesn't stay the same. And believe it or not, the staff that works here, they would like a raise here and there. So it's hard to balance that on the same money each year. And you'd think, well, students are going down, you can lay off a bunch of teachers. But when you have 30 kids gone, trickled across 4 grades, that doesn't necessarily take a teacher out. You know, maybe a piece of a teacher here and there, you know, a point something. So I think I'm getting on a soapbox. I'm gonna back off that. Sorry about that. So here's our revenue summary. Just taking a quick look at our summary, starting with property tax. Open enrollment is a huge revenue for us. If we weren't such an attractive district and doing so well with the money that we have, we wouldn't be attracting kids to come in here from other districts. This is a huge help to our budget. It's what's been allowing us to survive as well as we have, because we can attract kids in here. You can see we get just over $2 million in open enrollment revenue. State equalization aid, it doesn't give us any more money to operate with, right? It just reduces the tax levy. The more we get, the less taxes we have. The less we get, the more taxes we have. Doesn't give us any more to operate with, just offsets the levy. So there's an indirect relationship between lines 1 and 3. The 16 million and the 6 million in 21-22, and then over in 23-24, the 17 million, the 5 million. All adds up to about 23 million. 23 million. And then we have some other smaller aids. The per pupil categorical aid, that's an important one. That didn't exist 7 years ago. And now it's become a pretty important aid. The first year, I think we got $50 per student. Now we're up to $742 per student on per pupil aid. It's outside the revenue limit. It helps us with operating. But this year, going into the next 2 years, that number didn't change. It was $742 per student last year. It'll be $742 the next 2 years. And if your student count goes down during those next 2 years, and it stays at the same number, you actually went down in per pupil aid. So we're pretty close. Small lift there. But I think our budget is short on the 22-23 prediction there.
Jeff, could you show the,
oops, sorry.
The reason the federal aid money number is, that's some pretty drastic differences.
Oh, thanks for bringing that up, Craig. The federal revenue. In 21-22, actually the year prior, we had $40,000 of ESSER money or COVID money. I forget what ESSER even stands for. It's COVID related funding from the federal government. In 21-22, we had 400,000. In 22-23, we used it to balance our budget. We had about $1 million actually in that year. That was federal COVID money. And then we're planning to use the rest of it next year, and then it's gone. So that's one-time money, and then it'll go back down to the normal about $600,000-700,000 once that COVID money is gone. So that's the federal money. Does that make sense? Just to look at it in a bar graph format, the percent coming from local, state, federal, and other sources here at Arrowhead. Expenditures. I just outlined some of the largest expenditures, and those being salary and benefits, made up of salaries, retirement system, social security, insurances, and other small benefits. So we're trending about a small increase. We're looking at about a $700,000 increase in salaries and benefits across the board. And then our total expenditures, I'll have to read that so you can see it, but it's going from actual expenditures in 21-22 of $30,677,000 to next year we're looking at $29.5 million. So why the difference there? Part of that is when we sold the farm, we had an expense to move that revenue into a capital fund, a capital improvement fund, Fund 46 we call it, and it's to set aside money to take care of your buildings or building projects in the future. So it counts as an expense in the year that we move that money. So that's why we had the higher budget back in 21-22 for actuals. Cost savings, we've done a lot over the last 10 years with our insurances and made adjustments. This year, we're going to a self-funded plan. We're always looking for savings in the way we operate, and these are some of the things we've done with benefits. We're looking to save about almost 500,000 next year by moving to the self-funded plan. We saw an ugly increase provided by our insurance carrier, and we decided we're going to try it on our own. I've done this before in another district, and it's still super successful today. So we made the move this year, and I think it's going to pay off. Our renewal would have been $500,000 more than what we're planning to go into the new year with. Just a comparison, and this is going back to sort of revenue limits, but also look what others are spending compared to Arrowhead. These are the high school districts, the 10 high school districts across the state. And we spend total cost. This is all in debt, everything, 15,000 per student. Well, Wilmot is spending 23,500 per student. We get a pretty good bang for our buck here at Arrowhead when you compare it to the other union high school districts. I mean, those are just high schools, just like we are. We're doing pretty good. So let's talk fund balance real quick. Fund balance, some people think it's a savings account, money just sitting there waiting to be used. It's kind of true, although we measure fund balance on June 30th. So our fund balance is about $11 million right now. It's about 37% of our expenditure budget. That's a good solid number. It has prevented us from having to borrow in order to make payroll in December. We're about cash out, and when we get to the end of December and that first payroll in January. And if we don't have enough sitting in the fund balance to get us through those two payrolls, then we have to borrow money to get us through those two payrolls, and we pay interest expense on it. So why are we so short in December and January? Go back a few slides. We get mostly revenue. Most of our revenue comes from property taxes, right? Property taxes don't get paid to us until January 15th. That's our first payment. Second payment comes in February 15th. Our third payment, we get a little bit of a smaller payment in April, and then the final payment comes after the budget's over in August. And we have to operate. So a fund balance is really important to get you through those years. We have a solid fund balance. We've managed pretty well under a low revenue situation that we're working with. Be able to sustain this kind of fund balance. So when people talk about fund balance, like go spend the fund balance, you can't do that. You can't pay for recurring operating expenses out of your fund balance because it's one-time money that you're spending. You have to balance your budget each year, or we'll be in trouble. So here's a quick summary. Revenues compared to expenditures, surplus or deficit at the end of each year. So we had almost a $300,000 surplus in 21-22. This year, our budget was to have a zero. I think we're going to end up with a small surplus. It'll be right around zero. And next year, we're planning for a use of $100,000 in fund balance to take care of a pool electrical system that is badly needed. And that pool is being band-aided right now. It's either that or we shut it down. And we don't want to shut it down. We have great swimmers. We have a lot of great student athletes that use that pool. Fayed that uses it, the community uses it. And so we are being nickeled and dimed a little bit for a pool that doesn't meet today's standards. I mean, it's 6 lanes. It doesn't have a diving well anymore. Our kids have to go near Milwaukee, on the way to Milwaukee for diving. So anyway, that's what the 100,000 is for. Where will our fund balance be at the end of all this? We'll be sitting about 37%. I think we can avoid cash flow borrowing again for another year. So that's good. Here's a fund balance summary, just those same numbers, looking at it in a bar chart format. Another look at the funding formula. Remember, it's revenue limit that determines what we get to operate with. And then how much of it will the state pay? And the rest of it is what the taxpayer will pay. Tax levy and mill rate. So our levies broke out into three funds. General operating fund is Fund 10. Fund 38 is a non-referendum approved debt service fund. So we did a tech ed remodel 10 years ago. And we have two more payments of 117,000. That comes out of our revenue limit. So when that gets paid off, we'll have another 117,000 to put toward operations. But for now, we have to pay the debt down. And then the capital expansion fund, which is what we use to pay for our roofing projects. So we levy about $300,000 for that. But again,